Hi, I'm Tinabeth Pina. When we think of animals, we usually think of our pets, but you're about to meet some amazing creatures who just might end up saving your life one day. All this, and oh yes, some amazing dogs. Science and You starts now.
Hi, I'm Ernabel Demillo. So if you're wondering what's all that racket, it could be the Brood 2 cicadas. They are back this summer after a 17-year nap. I'll have their story coming up on Science and You.
There's a big buzz in New York City, and it has to do with the sweet sounds of locally produced honey. I'm Andrew Falzon. That story is coming up.
I'm Anne Riddell. Could mice like these save human lives by detecting landmines with super sniffer noses? You'll meet the scientists doing that research ahead on Science and You.
I'm Donna Hanover. You're on candid camera, and we'll take your DNA. That's what's happening to some endangered species in the wild, thanks to some impressive technology. Ahead on Science and You.
I'm Mike Gilliam. It seems like birds chirp and sing from dusk to dawn, and maybe there's something we can learn about ourselves from all that singing. I'll tell you all about it ahead on Science and You.
I'm Tinabeth Pina. Who can bring stress relief in a time of tragedy? Man's best friend, that's who. And that's coming up next on Science and You.
Hi, I'm Ernabel Demillo. Do you remember the summer of 1996? Well, let me refresh your memory. Bill Clinton was president, and Hillary had just finished testifying in the Whitewater scandal. And cell phones, well, they didn't quite look like this. And it was also the last time we here in the Northeast got a visit from these noisy insects. The Brood 2 cicadas are back. That buzz you hear is the buzz of billions of male cicadas looking for love. It's a mating ritual that scientists say date back to the Ice Age. Of the 3,000 different types of cicadas, only 7 are periodic cicadas or magic cicadas, and they are found only in the Northeast. So what were the Brood 2 doing the last 17 years? Louis Sorkin, an entomologist at the American Museum of Natural History, tells us the cicadas technically never left. The females laid their eggs, and the eggs hatched in the ground beneath us.
They've been feeding for 17 years. Since they hatched from eggs 17 years ago and were a few millimeters long, drop to the ground, feed on plant roots, and then as they get larger on tree roots.
At 17 years old, the Brood 2 are all grown up and ready to find a mate, and that's what all the commotion is about.
So they'll produce a sound to attract females. They'll produce other sounds when the females are closer. They'll have duets. They may even try to drown out other males that are nearby, so those males don't really hear what's going on. They might fly away. Then that male is allowed to mate with the female.
So it sounds like a noisy nightclub in New York City.
Oh, even more than New York City, because you'll have billions of these.
The clicking of billions of cicadas can reach up to 90, 100 syllables. That's about as noisy as a jackhammer. Cicadas that appear every year are found all over the world, and you could hear them usually later in the summer. The periodical cicadas, like the Brood 2, emerge in staggered years, 13 and 17. So should we be afraid when the cicadas are swarming and looking for love? Sure, they aren't the most attractive bug. Well, maybe to a female cicada they are. But scientists say there is nothing to fear. Cicadas are noisy but harmless. And yes, they are edible.
I hear that they're actually quite tasty, and they're actually okay to eat.
Oh, they are, yes. It's best if you get the cicada as it leaves the ground and molts to the adult. That's the teneral adult. It's very soft, and it's very much akin to soft-shell crabs that you eat, because a soft-shell crab is a crab that just molted, so now it's very soft. And that's when they're shipped out to consumers. So if you collect the cicadas as they come out of the ground, let them molt, you have an adult, freshly molted adult, then you could freeze it or refrigerate it and cook it whichever way you want.
And have
you know,
you tried-
sauteed is good.
Really? Have you tried cicada?
I've eaten them. Very good. It tastes a bit
Tastes like chicken?
like cicada. It tastes like cicada, but that tastes a little bit like corn or asparagus.
Past the ketchup. Well, maybe not.
So the Brood 2 cicadas will be back in 2017. That's 2030. Who knows what the world will look like? What will cell phones look like? Who'll be president? Whoever it is, I'm sure she'll be doing a good job. I'm Ernabel Demillo for Science and You.
Archaeology tells us that people have been keeping bees since the year 700 BC, but it was actually illegal to keep bees in New York City up until the spring of 2010. Now beekeepers have set up hives across the city, an endeavor that's been good for the economy, good for your garden, and may even be good for your health. Take a peek at Ruth Harrington's backyard in Douglaston, Queens, and you might think you're on a miniature farm. A small vegetable patch sits next to a hen house where roommates Eggie and Red produce an egg a day. A mother of two, Ruth enjoys being a garden gourmet and likes that many of her family's meals are homegrown. So when New York City lifted its ban on honeybees in 2010, Ruth decided it was time to add honey to the homegrown menu.
And that was a year that I had started beekeeping, and I didn't really tell anyone. And when I finally told this family that I'm right across the way with bees, they were thrilled because they saw the immediate benefit of having the bees. Without bees, we will not have apples. We will not have watermelon.
New York City law requires that beekeepers control their bees and that they not interfere with neighbors or pedestrians. Ruth's bees are secluded in a neighbor's backyard, overlooking a large man-made gully and the Long Island Railroad tracks below. While bees are buzzing here in New York City, it hasn't been the same story outside of the 5 boroughs. Across the country and across the globe, bee populations have been faltering, leaving scientists to wonder why. It was 2006 when beekeepers worldwide noticed a sudden decline in the honeybee populations, some as drastic as 90%. Though there have been similar reports of sudden population decrease in honeybees throughout history, scientists became concerned and coined the term colony collapse disorder, or CCD. They're still trying to figure out what causes CCD. One suspect is the tiny varroa mite. Seen here attached to a honeybee in a prenatal stage, the red parasites feed on the bee's blood, leaving the bee with open wounds and vulnerable to disease. The United States Department of Agriculture is researching other causes of CCD that include other parasites like the varroa mite, pathogens like bacteria and viruses, poor hive management by beekeepers, including overcrowding of bees, and environmental issues, including lack of pollen, nectar, and nutrients, and exposure to pesticides and contaminated water. The government is concerned because honeybees are a cornerstone of agriculture in the United States. The USDA says that honeybees are responsible for pollinating $15 billion worth of crops annually, and 1/3 of all the food we eat is affected by honeybee pollination. Ruth says many of her fellow beekeepers have not had problems with CCD in New York City, but they have experienced difficulty because of the weather.
Last year, there were many days where in the middle of the winter, the weather reached about 52, 55 degrees, but then it would drop down dramatically by the nighttime to about 20 degrees. When the temperature suddenly drops, it doesn't give the bees a chance to go back into the cluster, and they just froze to death.
Despite that minor setback, Ruth's hives continue to expand. During her first year, her 2 hives yielded about 100 pounds of honey. Now, after only 3 years of beekeeping, Ruth has 12 hives and expects more than 500 pounds of honey this year.
The height of the season is in July, and that's where typically a beekeeper would extract their honey. We do have to keep about 50 pounds of honey in the beehive. It's food that's stored for the bees to eat over the winter.
Each bee plays a specific role in the bee community. Male bees are called drones and serve the sole purpose of mating with the queen bee, who is the leader of the hive. She's bigger than all the other bees and is easily recognized because of her long abdomen.
Her main job is to lay eggs. She lays about 2,000 to 3,000 eggs a day. And without the eggs, of course, the beehive cannot proliferate.
Most of those bees that hatch will become worker bees. Because they're in high demand in the hive, they're constantly hatching, and our cameras caught this newborn ready to work right after emerging from its cell. All workers are female. They spend the last few weeks of their lives collecting nectar from flowers, which is turned into honey. Now, with all this bee activity in New York City, you may end up playing host to an unwelcome hive. If that happens, don't call the exterminator. Instead, try finding a local beekeeper. It costs them about $100 to start their own new hive, so they'll probably come and take yours for free. Now, that is a pretty sweet deal. For CUNY TV, I'm Andrew Falzon.
I'm Anne Riddell. Mice, you may think of them as household pests, but could these little rodents have a big role to play in saving human lives with super sniffer noses? Take a look. What if a mouse could save a life with its nose? That's the research underway in this lab at Hunter College in New York City. Scientists Paul Feinstein and Charlotte Dulst are breeding genetically modified mice who might one day end up on the front lines of landmine detection.
For 25 years, people have wanted to create landmine detectors through all kinds of artificial noses. And that's why I was very excited about this project, because most of the artificial noses don't work very well.
The goal here is to create an enhanced nose, a breed of super sniffer mice with a heightened ability to smell DNT, the chemical cousin to TNT.
I mean, people train rats and dogs to sniff out landmines, but we think that if you can make an animal that is an innate detector for that particular odor, it may be easier and sort of accelerate the process of detecting landmines.
So are these mice essentially genetically programmed to be super sniffers for this particular chemical?
That's our hope. That's our hope.
But how exactly do they do that? Professor Feinstein explains transgenesis.
Transgenesis is the act of taking a linear piece of DNA, putting it into an egg by injection. You literally inject the DNA into the nucleus of an egg. You fertilize that egg.
Okay.
You plant the egg back into the mother, and she gives rise to pups with your DNA in the genome now.
The result is a genetically inherited trait passed down from parent to offspring.
We're not creating a Frankenstein, we're just tweaking something that's normal in the body. Right? This is not like creating a monster, just slightly shifted from what a normal animal looks like to increase the population of neurons.
As if I had a really strong ability to smell strawberries.
Right, that's right. That's right. That doesn't make you a monster, that just makes you unique.
Unique as they may be, you might wonder, why mice? The Hunter researchers say there are advantages. For one thing, mice are light and unlikely to set off landmines, and there are other considerations as well.
The housing for these small animals is cheaper, and they breed really fast. I mean, it takes 21 days.
The work here is very much at an experimental stage. Even if the sensor in the mice is perfected, there's the issue of how the information will be reported back to humans. One option is tracking the path the mice take, either toward or away from the odor they're sensitized to. But that's an area of research still to come. Yet the possibilities are fascinating. If mice could be used in landmine detection, what else might they do?
When we have earthquakes and we use cadaver dogs to look for people or look for injury, theoretically, if you could tweak mice to have those kind of behaviors, you could get mice to go places where dogs and humans cannot.
You could have a real army of them.
Right. I think that would be a wonderful use for them, is in these situations where you're looking for people, for human beings that are either injured or have died, and you're desperately trying to find them.
The scientists here at Hunter say they have plenty of research ahead of them here in the lab before they'll be ready for field trials with the super sniffer mice, but that could be underway in 3 to 5 years. I'm Anne Riddell for Science and You.
I'm Donna Hanover. We'll take your photo or your DNA, thank you. That's how scientists at the Wildlife Conservation Society are tracking and saving animals with high-tech equipment. The Bronx Zoo, which is the headquarters of the organization, has long been proud of the exotic animals visitors can see, like the popular and endangered snow leopard. But one of the WCS's most dramatic recent finds on the other side of the globe is a pocket of snow leopards still surviving in the high mountains of Afghanistan. It's a thrilling discovery because there are thought to be fewer than 7,500 of them on the planet. Science has led the way in finding these animals as they were recorded on camera traps similar to these, many of which were set by the 74 rangers the WCS hired in that country. The traps put time, date, and temperature stamps on the photos. Peter Zoller, the deputy director for the Asia program of the WCS, explains that the camera traps have two parts, a camera and a collector.
They line them up in such a way so that an infrared beam operates going across the area where they hope an animal will pass. Usually you set it up between, for example, two rocks. Any animal or other object that crosses the beam of the infrared from the camera sets off the camera and you get a picture. So you get pictures sometimes of windblown leaves and small birds, but you also get pictures of snow leopards.
Another way WCS scientists find and count exotic animals in the wild is through their DNA. They get it, not all that glamorously, from scat samples.
For Marco Polo sheep, which is the largest wild sheep in the world, it actually has horns that when they curl around twice, and they're basically 6 feet from tip to tip, enormous animals. So what we do is we collect their dung and get DNA samples from this, which tells us essentially the relatedness of individual animals to each other and groups of animals.
These scientific technologies are important because once there is data confirming there are animals to protect, the WCS tries to help the local population conserve them as a valuable resource. In the case of the snow leopards, local people are now working against poaching that has long occurred for furs and medicinal uses. As for other dangers, shepherds have sometimes killed the snow leopards to keep them from harming livestock.
The people up in the mountains are really living right on the edge. They're extremely poor, so loss of livestock can really have an effect. We're actually working with communities now to build such things as predator-proof corrals to keep snow leopards from being able to get at livestock during the evenings. And we're working on community insurance programs so that animals that are taken by animals such as snow leopards the local people can be compensated, and thus they will not have a reason to go out and kill snow leopards in retaliation. We are primarily encountering very warm, welcoming villagers. They're interested in what we're doing, and we can't operate without their help and their permission, essentially. And they have granted it to us every time.
As for the science involved in their work here and in more than 60 countries around the globe, the Wildlife Conservation Society finds that different environments require different adaptations.
What is the protection for the camera?
Yeah, they make small plastic boxes that are made differently depending on the kind of conditions that we put them in. In a situation like the high mountains of Afghanistan, the issue primarily is snow and very, very low temperatures. But we use these kinds of cameras elsewhere in the middle of the tropical rainforests of Asia and Africa, for example. And there you have very different conditions, and you have different constructed boxes. But it is very critical to have the right kind of safety measures around the cameras.
Zoller says next up is capture-recapture technology, camera traps that help confirm the markings and identities of individual animals by photographing them from both sides at the same time. Zoller and other scientists are excited that recently 3 snow leopards were captured and collared. Tracking these animals via the collars is providing even more valuable data about their movements and behaviors. I'm Donna Hanover for Science and You.
I'm Mike Gilliam. Do you ever listen to birds singing in the trees? It seems like they're communicating, right? Well, they are. And some folks at Queens College are studying them to learn some pretty cool things about how humans communicate.
Professor David Laddie and his students are using bird songs to learn about humans and how language changes over time and distance.
We would like to know how languages diverge, how dialects form, how new languages form, how people, once they get to a new location where there are no people, how their language has formed and diverged once they got there. We can't do that with humans because we live too long, we mingle with each other, we travel great geographic distances, but we can do it with birds.
Even though birds may not learn their songs the same way humans learn, they do modify them from generation to generation as they spread and adapt. The house finch was introduced to New York in 1940 and since then has spread throughout the eastern seaboard.
I'm trying to get theory from birds that I can then cast in a more general form that will be perhaps relevant to studying humans.
A lot of the work is done in the lab and at the computer. In fact, they dissect the bird's song.
We try to cut up the song in the same way that geneticists would cut up DNA and find out what components make it up. And then once we've quantified those, measured those in several dimensions, then we're able to see how they change over the generations or how they change as you move geographically.
Now, to get the bird songs they need for the study, Professor Lottie and his students have to get out into the field and harvest them. They use a rig like this, a shotgun mic and a digital recorder.
Simon is one of Lottie's students.
The payoff is to find out what they are doing, really. Are they talking to each other? Are they communicating? How are they communicating? And there's a lot to learn from this project. And what I've learned a lot is how different house finches communicate differently in different parts of Long Island.
So I'll play an example of a swamp sparrow song here. Here's another one. So those are repeated phrases, and that phrase, which is a combination of 3 or 4 phonemes or letters, you could say, or sounds, has to be learned. If the bird didn't hear that when it was young, it wouldn't be able to sing that when it was an adult. But you notice there's a particular rhythm to it, and that rhythm is inherited. It's endogenous. It doesn't need to be learned. The birds are singing songs that are remarkably similar to the birds that their ancestors 20 generations ago were singing in the same area, and is different from another town away, which is very unusual. We wouldn't have expected the birds in Palm Springs to be singing so differently than in San Diego, and for those differences to last for 20, 30 generations. But that's what seems to be happening, at least in some of the songs.
Okay, so that was taught?
They basically passed them on from generation to generation through social learning. So they would learn the songs of the birds that were around them when they were growing up.
And a female bird may realize a host of things about the male by listening to his song.
For instance, this male can defend a territory well. This male is young versus old. This male can
tired.
take care of the offspring. Yeah, tired, just woke up, not doing so well, etc. And didn't learn very well, not very smart.
So all of those things can be realized by the female, and she makes her decision whether to mate with the male. And another male can make his decision as to whether to invade the territory or try to take it over based on those connotations. Females usually don't sing. It's usually the male singing to repel other males or to mate. And Lottie says we can learn a lot from that song as well.
Studying birds allows us to measure those cultural changes in a species where these traits are vastly more simple than they are in humans. And that is one inroad to understanding how learned traits change over time in humans.
So the study of bird songs may provide a wealth of knowledge about human communication. I'm Mike Gilliam for Science and You.
I'm Tinabeth Pina. Our pets. They give us unconditional love, are non-judgmental, and comfort us when the unexpected happens. And that comfort is now moving way beyond the household pet. Right, Roxanne?
You know, you look at this little fluffy head, and when she licks you, you know, everything melts away for a moment.
Willow represents a new breed in therapy, canine therapy. These four-legged comforters have been bringing relief and a brief respite to some of our country's most traumatized citizens. From the nightmare in Newtown, Connecticut, to those affected by Superstorm Sandy, to the horror of the Boston Marathon bombings, people respond positively to the one-on-one doses of canine comfort.
An important part of the healing process for people in any type of crisis is not just the people that were most directly affected by the bombings, but it's the surrounding people of those groups, people that know people, or just people who live in the city and had something like this happen.
We've known for a long time that being around animals makes us feel good. So programs have been developed around that observation, and people relax around dogs and cats and other kinds of friendly animals. So in these tragedies, there are now trained human-dog teams that go into these disasters and comfort either people who are in great pain or, in some cases, search and rescue dogs that will find people who are buried. It's also very comforting to everyone. There are dogs in dog person teams in hospitals, in courtrooms, in therapy situations for people who've been abused in different ways. So there are many arenas in which dogs are helpful.
For a long time, dogs and other animals were denied access to many places, but much of that is changing.
Dogs are sometimes brought in before surgery and sometimes after surgery or during physical therapy. One of the things we're finding is that our pain goes down often when we're around a dog or another friendly animal. That's been shown with hip surgery, fibromyalgia, and some other really painful conditions. So if you can bring a dog in before the surgery, people will be more relaxed. And if you can bring a dog in after the surgery, they need less pain medication.
Research has also shown that interactions with therapy dogs can increase oxytocin, the bonding hormone, increase dopamine, the happiness hormone, while lowering cortisol, the stress hormone. And it's not just the person's hormone level that's affected.
Happily, it works both ways. The dogs get a release and people get a release. So we now know that it isn't just, oh, I really like animals, everyone should have one. There's real scientific reasons why blood pressure goes down and stress levels go down.
Therapy dogs Toby and Willow help bring the stress levels down for Sandy victims.
When Sandy hit, as it was hitting, I said, we've got to do something. In that setting, Willow loved seeing the people, and it made her happy to make them smile.
People who were away from home, away from family, and maybe they had lived with a dog their whole lives, and then started, living in an assisted living facility and, couldn't see their dogs anymore. I think it really cheered up a lot of people.
Specially trained comfort dogs deployed by Lutheran church charities visited victims in Newtown and made bedside visits to dozens hospitalized in the aftermath of the Boston bombings.
Something about petting a dog and then the people sitting next to me, like I don't even know them, but just being able to talk about it with them has been really comforting, and it's like the dogs kind of enable us to all connect.
There's been a couple of things to kind of like help Boston come together, and a lot of them have been very somber and it's very respectful, but when you see a bunch of golden retrievers lying out in the sun, it's kind of easy to kind of forget and just kind of focus on the dogs and kind of just think of like the better things in life.
Animals of almost any kind can do therapy work, including cats, birds, rabbits, horses, and believe it or not, llamas and alpacas. That's our show for today. I'm Tinabeth Pina. See you next time on Science and You.